Hey, so we are here with Katherine Morton, and she's going to talk to us about cultural sensitivity. So one of the important aspects for engineering reports or any document really that's going to go out into the public is having it properly, let's not use the wrong words about people, and the right words about people are the words that they would like to use. So Katherine, can you tell us to start with what qualifies you to talk about cultural sensitivity, and how did you start getting involved with different cultures and documents?
Great, thanks. And thanks so much for talking with me, Krista. It's great to be here. Yeah, I've been working in international development all over the world with people from various countries and cultures for the past 20 plus years. So I don't like to say that I'm qualified to talk about all cultures and peoples, because of course, really the only qualified people are the people who are the people who live in those cultures. But what I think that I have is that, as you say, that sensitivity to say, maybe this isn't quite written the way that people would like to read about themselves. And so how can we check it? What resources can we use? What people can we talk to in order to make it acceptable, as you say, for the whole public, for everyone in the public?
That makes sense. And so you started off actually internationally early in your career as an engineer. So could we just have a little introduction about that for the people watching?
Sure. As not as an engineer, but I have an MBA, right. And I started out in the nonprofit sector, and I was working in various nonprofits in Canada, and particularly with all sorts of marginalized groups, including with First Nations in Canada, particularly around HIV and AIDS. And then I got into international development, and I've worked in all sorts of sectors in international development, health, education, civil society. And I've been really privileged to be able to work around the world with major international NGOs and within the UN system in East Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, all over North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, I said, and South Asia, India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, etc. I think I've worked in something like 15 or more countries, and then I've been to, in total, about 70. So I really love working with people and language and culture, and learning about culture, and knowing that everything we do, everything we say is cultural, everything. Mm-hmm. So it's really exciting to learn about that, and to also understand how everything we do and say and write is cultural, and therefore how can we ensure that we're taking all different perspectives into account.
There's so many things we don't even realize that are cultural artifacts, or just things that we say that we, so many things. And so I was thinking, when you said you're not qualified to talk about all the cultures, but it's kind of like you're qualified to listen to all the cultures, and so to find out. So how would it be different, like being culturally sensitive when you're abroad compared to now that you're home in Ontario? What would the difference be into how you approach it? Or is there a difference, or is it quite the same?
I think it's similar. I mean, we're lucky to live in a very multicultural society. Especially, I mean, I'm right in the center of Toronto, which I love, because every single day when I'm out, I hear different languages. I see all sorts of variety of peoples, and it's wonderful. There's a mosque right behind me, and that's fabulous. So I think that in Canada, how we do it is in our actions and in our words. And as editors, it's our responsibility to work with our clients to make the documents that our clients want to produce as best as they can be. So is there any language in the document that could be offensive, that could be misunderstood, that might not get the idea across as clear as they want it? And so my qualification is in being able to say, hey, let's look at this terminology or this wording, and it's possible, and and probable that I can advise on that, but I will always go to the source. So as the famous Latin phrase is, nil de nobis sin nobis, nothing about us without us, right? So what are the resources, the sources that we can use? Who are the people I know, all over the place, who can just give that little check of, yep, that's fine, and that's a good way to go with this language.
So it's kind of like, to put it in engineering terms, if I'm reviewing something scientifically or mathematically, I'm looking at it with an eye to say significant digits as one aspect. So a cultural review would just be one type of review on a document. So you would review the language and the science and the math, but then also just maybe run an eye for cultural sensitivity.
That's right. Yeah. As an example, even when people are trying to be inclusive and respectful, there might be small mistakes. So for example, one that I often see is when non-Indigenous people, non-Indigenous creators of reports or editors or writers say things like our First Nations or our Indigenous peoples. And that sets off little spidey senses for me, because they're not ours. they're not Canada's. First Nations are sovereign nations and should be referred to as such, and respected as such. So just little things like that, we can just change the wording and make it better, and make sure that people feel comfortable.
And it's not just to be a nice person, it's also because if you're working, for the people trying to learn how to make the best money as engineers, it doesn't do well to annoy the people. If you're working on Indigenous land, just keeping everybody happy is better, and keeping the clients happy. And of course, if you annoy the landowners, then you might annoy the client and you might lose the client. And like these small little things can turn contracts sometimes.
That's sure. True. That's right. You want to have is get off on the best footing possible.
Right. And so, obviously one thing people can do is hire someone who has spidey senses already tuned in, but there's resources people can check out and learn. I always recommend the Indigenous Canada course, free out of the University of Alberta. I know you've taken that one as well. We'll put the link in the comments below. And you had some other resources to suggest?
Yes, absolutely. So a couple that I think are excellent, specifically focused on Indigenous peoples here in Canada, but there's also another one that's even broader, is, and you would know this one, of course, is the UBC's Indigenous Peoples Language Guidelines. And so this is free on the UBC website for anybody to use. And it's an overview of what terms to use and what terms to avoid. There's not a lot. I mean, there is some sort of don't do this and for sure do this, but there's not a lot of strict rules. It's more about meaning and grammar, and what's acceptable and what's not, what may not be acceptable. And again, not hard and fast rules, but and language is always evolving, and people are different. Indigenous groups in Canada are all diverse themselves. So different people have different viewpoints on how they want to be referred to. So just having that, and that's why it's important to ask somebody to say, this First Nation might like to be referred in this way, but this First Nation likes to be referred to in this way. And so what is appropriate in this case? Mm-hmm. So it's all about context. So for example, you would find in UBC's Indigenous Peoples Language Guidelines that it may be okay in some contexts to use the word native, which always should be capitalized, of course. So for example, if it's part of an organizational name that derives from an earlier period, such as the Vancouver Native Health Society, that's the name of the organization, or if it's a general term like First Nations, but it should be avoided as a term to describe a person or persons. It's become a bit derogatory. So language is evolving, language is fluid. It's important to, as you say, have someone who has some cultural ability to maybe do a sensitivity check, and then to be able to say, I know where we can go, or this is where you can go to get the right information.
Another guide I really like is Gregory Younging's style guide. And so I like that it's almost just a good storybook. Like I enjoyed sitting down and reading So the way that they talk about how language should be used in Indigenous context, just it goes through the stories of why things are the way they are. So I found it interesting historical context, and yeah, just a good read and not expensive to buy. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And that was the second resource I was going to mention. It's not surprising that you were ahead of me on that one, because you know as well as I do that, yeah, so The Elements of Indigenous Style is by Greg Youngling, and you can purchase it. And it is more comprehensive than the UBC guidelines. It's actually a style guide. So it includes style principles, publishing practices, editorial issues, and an appendix on the essence of traditional knowledge, as you're referring to. So it's interesting and it's helpful. It provides answers for common and uncommon questions that people might have. And interestingly, the author notes that the guide is hopefully only first edition, but he has since passed away.
Yeah.
So it will be wonderful and interesting if someone or some group of people are able to take it up and keep it going, because style guides are always evolving. Like, for example, you know, probably the most common one that we use for much of our work is the Chicago Manual of Style, and we're in the 17th edition, right?
Yeah, always updating with publishing practices, or yeah, things change with online practices. So lots of things. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you.
And I wanted to mention one third resource, and this one is more broad, and this is the Conscious Style Guide. And it's been created by a woman by the name of Karen Yin, and it is available, it's online, and it's you can subscribe to it. And it's not a book per se, like the other ones might be, but it's an ongoing dialogue and on the website, and then you can get updates through email on things that people are talking about. It deals with three main areas, which are ethnicity, race, and nationality, gender, sex, and sexuality, and finally ability and disability. But there are many other areas like age, appearance, and spirituality or religion. So people sometimes wonder, well, what does that mean? Like, how do I use a style guide for example, with ability and disability? I noticed that the sunlight is changing.
It is.
So for example, there's a word that is commonly used as an adjective, which is crippling. We say crippling debt, for example. And we don't realize that this actually might be offensive to some people in terms of ability and disability. But it's easy, and the Conscious Style Guide has a glossary of words that might not be so appreciated to use, and what to replace them with. So for example, instead of saying crippling debt, we could say crushing debt, right? And using other words, which I'm guilty of, and it's hard, you know, to think about the etymology of words and who they might affect, but describing something as lame or crazy, right? And these are ableist words, and you just don't know who your audience might be, you know. Maybe it is somebody.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. There's so many things in our culture that we just don't think through until we do. Yeah.
So there's a great glossary on the Conscious Style Guide, and I encourage people to use it. Or again, if you have an editor who just, you know, again, has those spidey senses to say, you know, I think I could come up with a different phrase here for you that would get across your idea very clearly and concisely, and perhaps have a more inclusive audience.
Another one I just feel like mentioning quickly is instead of saying disabled person, we would now say person with a disability. And there's lots of similar parallel examples of that. To say disabled person, it's not the definition of who they are. It's one aspect of their being. So these kind of things, you know, people don't think about typically, but they can matter a lot to those client relationships.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this interview. That's been fantastic. So again, this is Katherine Morton. She edits and she's in Ontario. And well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Krista. This has been great. Thank you.